So, just over a week ago, Europe finally got Pokemon Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire. But before I get on to reviewing those, let's go back 1 year and review Pokemon X and Pokemon Y. Hello again, and how are we all? Okay, so it's been a couple of weeks since my last video. There's a couple of reasons behind that, which I won't bother you guys with. Anyway, like I said in the intro of this video, just over a week ago, we finally in Europe got Pokemon Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire. And before I go on to taking a look at those, I just want to review and take a look at X and Y, which came out just over a year ago. Now, Pokemon X and Pokemon Y were the first in the main series of games to have a worldwide release. But this wasn't the only first that X and Y kind of paved the way for. Before you even start your journey across the region of Kalos, you're asked the age-old question, are you a boy or a girl? And this has been standard ever since Pokemon Crystal on the Game Boy, which added a female trainer alongside the male trainer, which was the only choice for players in the previous titles. You then, as an exclusive to X and Y, you get the option of how your selected trainer is going to look, through a choice of 3 different skin tones and hair colours, and then you get to choose your name and the game begins. Now, I just want to briefly talk about the story. The story of Pokemon X and Y isn't anything new to anyone who's familiar with the main series of games. You're a kid who's starting on their Pokemon adventure and goes out into the world in the game's respective region, whether that be Kanto, Johto, Hoenn, etc., to catch and train Pokemon to earn badges at various gyms, to prove yourself as a trainer, and then going on to challenge the Elite Four and ultimately becoming the champion, while also stopping an evil organization from realizing their plans. So, like with the past games, the narrative of X and Y is kept simple and easily digestible for the intended younger audience, while at the same time not being too complex to put off an older demographic. On to the graphics of X and Y. Now, X and Y went a completely different way. It became more modern, because gone are the days of the 2D pixelated sprites and overhead perspectives. With X and Y, Pokemon makes the full jump to 3D. Now, the conversion from 2D to 3D started in Generation 4 with Pokemon Diamond, Pearl and Platinum, with the introduction of some 3D elements in the overworld, while keeping the static pixelated sprites for the Pokemon and the trainers and the NPCs, until Generation 5 with Black and White and its follow-ups, where the sprites became a little more animated, the overworld was leaning closer to 3D, and the inclusion of a few cutscenes using some Pokemon Stadium-like visuals, while others utilized animation for the Xeeva or the live caster. X and Y makes the full transition to full 3D, with a more modern look for the overworld, the NPCs, the trainer, and more importantly, the Pokemon themselves. Since a handful have gone under some slight redesigns over the years, the overworld of Pokemon X and Y is simply amazing to look at, with this new dimension of depth and its bright and colourful scenery. It also allows for more interaction than previous games with the series, as well as some new camera angles during battles. Onto the mechanics. At the core, X and Y are using the tried and tested formula of the overworld exploration and turn-based RPG style battles, which have been there since Pokemon Red and Blue, or Red and Green if you're going by Japan's releases. Succeeding generations have seen the additions of double battles, triple battles, rotation battles, even multi-battles which can include up to 4 trainers, whereas X and Y have introduced 3 new variants to this. Horde encounters. Horde encounters are when trainers come across about 5 Pokemon of the same species, and they're typically half the level of one by itself you encounter in the wild. Sky battles. Now, sky battles are completely unique. Now, only Pokemon that have the ability to fly or levitate can be used to participate in these type of battles. You will need at least one Pokemon in your party that's in one of these categories, otherwise these battles will be locked to you. Another type of battle, which is new in X and Y, is the inverse battle. The inverse battle is where Pokemon type matchups are reversed, and this variant can only be accessed by challenging a Psychic on Route 18, and he can be challenged once a day, so a little thing there for you level grinders. Other additions in X and Y include the PSS, which replaces the C-Gear from the previous generation, and this allows for more connectivity with other players across the world, as well as adding some brand new features. The new features that the PSS introduces are Wonder Trade, where trainers can trade Pokemon anonymously. You could send off a Pokemon, someone else sends a Pokemon, you never know what you're gonna get. This could range from a Pokemon that you'll want to Wonder Trade right away to get some Pokemiles, or simply it's going to be a good one you're possibly going to include in your party. The GTS lets players search for specific Pokemon and put one of their own up for trade in exchange for one chosen by the player themselves. There are also other functions of the PSS. The primary interface of the PSS is divided into 3 categories: friends, acquaintances, and passers-by. Each of these allows for a maximum of about 100 players. Some other adjustments have been made in X and Y to make this navigation of the PSS and the game overall to be as quick and as problem-free as possible. The interface is more streamlined and makes tasks such as checking your map to trading Pokemon as painless an endeavor as possible. One such feature that I'm grateful for is the fact that the game save is now near instant. For example, if you're one of the older Pokemon players like I am, you would play until the batteries were practically dead. And anyone who is from that generation will ultimately remember what it was like to get so far in a game, you've captured a Pokemon you've been looking for a while, you haven't saved because you've been so immersed in the game, your battery's nearly dead, you go to save, it's nearly finished and then the battery cuts out and... Like I said, thankfully now in X and Y, the game save is now near instant, which is greatly appreciated. Now on to some other features of the PSS, but first I must address one thing in particular. Now, ever since the beginning, Pokemon has always had the message of, if you love your Pokemon and really care for them, that you will succeed as a trainer. But nothing in the games has really brought this philosophy in. But X and Y changed this with Pokemon and Me. Pokemon and Me allows for trainers to bond with a selected Pokemon in your party by feeding it Pokepuffs, playing games. You will need a minimum of 3 Pokemon in order to do this. You can also pet your Pokemon and even pull faces using the 3DS camera. Now, by doing this, it can ultimately impact how your Pokemon will battle, including landing more critical hits and even dodging attacks. There is also a new feature called Super Training, where trainers can put Pokemon through a series of mini-games in order to increase their IVs and potentially increase the amount of experience a Pokemon will get from EV training. While I'm talking about EV training, in X and Y you can now gain experience from catching Pokemon as well as battling them, which makes leveling up much easier. And this is made easier still with the EXP share, which you can get early in the game. And this shares your experience with all the Pokemon in your party, even if they don't participate. But if you would prefer to grind each Pokemon to level them up like in all the titles, you do get the option to turn this off. In X and Y, we also get the introduction of a whole new type, the Fairy type. the first new Pokemon type since Gold and Silver. The reason why these were added was to give a balance to Dragon-type Pokemon, who were previously weak only against Ice and Dragon types. After so long, we finally get the ability to customize trainers, and it is very extensive. From the very beginning, we get the choice of not only choosing what gender our trainer is, but also the skin tone and the hair. But throughout the game, the options become more extensive. From custom clothes, from buying from boutiques, you can even go so far as to change your trainer's hairstyle and even eye color after attaining the lens case. One last mechanic I want to touch on is Mega Evolutions. Now, Mega Evolutions are when certain Pokemon can temporarily evolve during battle, increasing their stats and, with some occasions, even changing their type. Nintendo nerfed this a little bit by making only one Mega Evolution available per battle, so it doesn't get abused. Now, here in this review, I must come to the drawbacks with X and Y. The first issue is probably obvious to anyone who uses the 3D feature extensively, and it's the frame drop. Now, thankfully, this is only really seen in Pokemon battles. The worst I've ever experienced it is in Horde battles, which, talking about the 3D feature, I must go on to something else. That being said, the use of the 3D feature is kind of minimal. I do think that certain parts of the overworld were designed with 3D in mind, but ultimately it led to nothing because the feature is disabled for the most part of the game. Now, this next thing I want to talk about in terms of drawbacks, it's more of a personal view than a criticism, and it's about the team in the games, Team Flare. Personally, I found them boring as antagonists, but their ultimate goal of making a beautiful and better world while making money and basically killing everyone who doesn't follow their standards was wasn't just nonsense. The reason I say this is because despite the fact that they want to make the world more beautiful and ultimately better, Team Flare never really do anything. And to that end, they're never really threatening compared to Team Galactic of White and Black in their follow-up games, who do blow up a lake at some point, which confuses me because I never played that game, but blowing up a lake is supposed to lead to the liberation of Pokemon for some reason. Their ultimate goal of making the world more beautiful ultimately is rather ambiguous, and it never gets fleshed out. It's never really shown how humans in the game make the world an uglier place, apart from some war that never gets talked about in detail, but only vaguely described before you fight either Zerny or Solvital, depending on which version you're playing. And this makes Team Flare ultimately... you just can't understand what they're going for or why they're doing it. Lastly, before I move on to another drawback, I'd like to talk about Lysandre, the leader of Team Flare. I believe he had so much missed potential, but it was interesting how he was portrayed to be a likable and somewhat sympathetic character, maybe even a kind character, but all of a sudden you get a holo clip saying he's basically going to kill everybody. And this just seems so abrupt and somewhat forced. At least that's the way it felt to me. My next complaint about X and Y is the small amount of post-game content, because you've beaten the Elite Four, you've become the champion, and you get the opportunity following that to encounter one of the 3 legendary birds of Kanto. And this depends ultimately on what starter you went with. I went with Chespin, and the Pokemon I got was Articuno. Aside from that, you do get the opportunity to capture 2 legendary Pokemon, Mewtwo and Zygarde. I've probably butchered that pronouncement. You also get the opportunity to find the remaining Mega Stones after having the Mega Ring upgraded by Sycamore, which also unlocks the last part of the main story, which is the Looker Bureau side story, if you want to take a look at that, and ultimately completing the Pokédex. These are the biggest issues that X and Y suffer from, despite the fact you do get access to the Friend Safari for shiny hunting, and the Battle Mazen for new challenges after getting the TMV pass and traveling to Cutulite City. So there's all the drawbacks I personally feel are wrong with X and Y. Okay, final thoughts. Overall, I believe that Pokemon X and Y has made a successful transition into the 3D plane, and the adjustments make for an invigorating experience, which still feels like the past Pokemon games, and I would say this is more of a regeneration than a revolution for the franchise. So X and Y does offer something for everyone, from older trainers like me, a possible new demographic, shiny hunters, EV trainers. They cater to all of this. So, in closing, Pokemon X and Y are two of the best of the whole main series of Pokemon games, and while the story has its shortcomings and the benefits to Mega Evolution are mostly unclear, the new features and overall presentation reinvigorates the core philosophies of the franchise and the fun of being the best, which makes the joy of catching them all once again a joyful and impressive experience. So there we have it, my review for Pokemon X and Pokemon Y. Next, I'm going to be taking a crack at Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire. I just want to thank you very much for watching, and for those of you who have been waiting for my newest video, I just want to say thank you very much for being patient with me. Hopefully I'm going to be doing things a bit more regular now. Okay, just to wrap up, thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye!